see we've got x squared plus 4x plus y squared minus 8y, and we've got a plus 32 equals 0. So the first thing that we want to do is our x's are already together. Our y's are pretty much together. We just need to deal with our positive 32. It is not grouped with the x's or the y's, so it needs to move to the other side to be a part of the radius. So we'll subtract 32 from both sides. And let's see if that helps us get started. We've got an x squared plus a 4x plus, I'm going to leave some room, y squared minus 8y. And I've got my negative 32 now on the other side. Now the first thing I need to do is complete the square with the x's. And I do have a 1 out in front of the x squared, so I can go ahead and just start by doing that. I'll start by taking my 4. And remember, when you're completing the square, the first thing you'll do is cut it in half, which will give me 2. Then square it, which will turn it back into a 4. So remember what that means is that means that I want to add 4 to both parts of my equation, along with the x's and to the other side to keep it balanced. Then I also need to complete the square with the y's. Again, there is a 1 out in front of the y squared, so we are already ready to go. I'm going to complete the square using the negative 8. Just like the last one, remember the first thing is to cut it in half, which will give us a negative 4. Then to square the negative 4 will give us 16. So that means I'm going to add a 16 with the y's, and I'm going to add it to the other side. And that means that this should all factor nicely. However, I'm not even going to bother factoring, and I'll show you why. I could if I wanted to, I just don't need to. It's because of this right-hand side. No matter what's going on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, even after I've added everything I'm going to complete the square, I've got a negative 32, and I'm basically adding a 20, which will give me a negative 12. This is my radius squared. So to actually find my radius, I'd have to take the square root, which means I'd end up with an imaginary number. So if I went to go find my radius, I'd have to take the square root of negative 12, and I'd start getting imaginary numbers and all sorts of stuff. You'd get 2i square roots of 3, and we're not going to even mess with that. Remember, if you end up with i's, what does it mean? It means that the graph is non-existent. So we'll say the graph is non-existent. Now, just to make sure you're comfortable with factoring, if you did want to go back and factor out those x's, they do factor. You did complete the square. What 2 factors of 4 add up to 4 is 2 positive 2, so you'd get an x plus 2 squared, 2 of them. And then you have your little plus sign. But then you'd also want to do the same thing for the y's if you wanted to factor those. What 2 factors of 16 add up to a negative 8? Because it's a negative 8, you would need 2 negative 4's, which would give you a y minus 4 squared. So it would still factor, it's just that the radius is the problem. That's what's making us not have a graph here, is the radius. Let's take a look at one last problem. Let's take a look at D. In D, we've got a little bit of a different situation going on. We've got 4x squared plus 8x plus 4y squared minus 36y minus 59 equals 0. So we'd start this off the same way and say, well, our x's are already grouped together, and our y's are already grouped together. So let's move our 59 over by adding 59 to both sides. And what that would do would now give us a 4x squared plus 8x plus a 4y squared minus 36y equals 59 on the now other side. Now, this next one is the first one that we notice something else that's also slightly different for the first time, is that we have a number that's out in front of our x squared term. And I made sure that each time that we're doing a problem, we're mentioning that, because when it's different, we need to do something first. We need to factor it out. We still need a 1 here, so we need to factor out the 4. So the question is, what will that leave us with? That will leave us with an x squared plus, well, the 4 has to also get pulled out of the 8, which will leave us with a 2x. And that'll get us started. I'll bring down our plus, but then I run into the exact same problem with the y's, which means I need to factor out a 4 from the y's as well. So if I pull out a 4 from the y's, that will leave me with a y squared. Pulling the 4 out of the negative 36 will leave me with a negative 9y equals, still we haven't touched the other side yet, so it's still a 59. Okay, now we can still complete the square just like we were planning on. Let's start out by completing the square on the x's. So remember, we always start with the number that's out in front of the x's once there's no number out in front of the x squared term. So we've got a 2 out in front of our x. So remember, the first thing we do is cut it in half, which will give us a 1. Then we'll square it, which will still be a 1. So that's what we want to go inside of our parentheses around with all of our x's, is I need a plus 1. So the question is, what am I also going to do to the other side? The instinct would be that I just added a 1 to one side, I need to add a 1 to the other side, but you actually didn't add a 1. Look, the 4 will get distributed to that. So you actually added a 4 to that side, not a 1. You put the 1 inside of the parentheses, but that actually means you actually added in a 4 because there's a 4 on the outside. So I'm going to make sure I add a 4 to the other side as well. Okay, now I need to complete the square with the y's. So we have, we need to, this one's going to be a little bit messier. We've got a negative 9 in front of our y. Just like before, the first thing we do is cut it in half, so negative 9. Cut in half will be negative 9 halves. Then we still need to square it. Remember, squaring a fraction means you need to square the top, so 9 squared is 81. Then we also need to square the bottom, the 2, which is a 4. So that's what we're going to end up adding in here. It's not pretty, it's an 81 over 4. I'm not too worried about it, though, and I'll show you why. The reason why we're not worried about it, it looks messy, is because it doesn't mean that we're going to add an 81 over 4 to both sides. It means we're going to add, remember it would get multiplied by the 4, whatever the 4 times the 81 over 4 is. Well, if you multiply out the 4 and the 81 over 4, what would happen is the 2 4s would cancel, leaving you with just the 81. So that's technically what we added to the left-hand side, because it gets multiplied by a 4. So that means I'm going to also add an 81 to the other side as well. Okay, this has gotten a little bit messy, so this is going to be a little bit harder to follow, so I need to be a little bit more careful. So let's deal with our x's first. Well, I had my 4 out in front first, so I need to leave that there. Now let's see how my x's are going to factor. I had an x squared. Let's see, I have an x squared plus 2x plus 1. Well, that means we need 2 factors of 1 that add up to 2. Well, that's going to be a positive 1 and a positive 1, which means it will factor out as an x plus 1 squared. I got to bring down my plus that goes in the middle. Now my y's also had a 4 factored out, so let's leave that there. That was that 4 that was factored out. Now I need to look at how my y's factored. Let's see. Well, our y's, we had a y squared minus 9y and an 81 over 4. This one's not going to be as pretty. Well, because of the minus, we know it's going to be a y minus something. Well, what two numbers multiply together to give you 81 over 4, but when you add them up, give you the negative 9? Give you a big hint. It's always going to be the halfway point in our completing the square. It's always going to be that little piece in the middle. That's why when we did our x's, that's what worked with was the 1. And if you go back through our other problems that we've done, it was the same pattern. So I'm going to put my negative 9/2 here from my middle step. And what you'll notice is the 9/2 times another 9/2 would get you indeed the 81 over 4. However, negative 9/2 added to another negative 9/2 would add you up to a negative 9 as well. So it does work out. Have to bring down my equal sign. I am getting there. On the other side, I've got a 59, a 4, and an 81. I need to add up everything I've got over there. That's going to make up my part of my radius. What I get when I add up the 59, the 4, and the 81 is a really nice number. I get a 144. However, I'm almost there. I still have this problem of this factor of 4 in front of everything. So what I do need to do is I need to divide everything straight on through on both sides by a factor of 4. And what that will do, on the left-hand side, will cancel out both factors of 4, leaving me with just my x squared term and my y squared term. So now what I'll have is my x plus 1 squared like I had, just no number out in front, plus a y minus 9/2 squared equals, now 4 goes into 144 as 36. And now I can talk about what's my center and what's my radius. Well, my center is going to be based on what's with the x's and what's with the y's. Well, the center, well, we've got a plus 1 with the x's, so I'll actually use a minus 1 as my x coordinate, and a negative 9/2 as my y coordinate. But I always have to take the opposite, so it'll be actually a positive 9/2. And remember, the other side is your radius, and it has already been squared. So that means my actual radius, taking the square root, is going to be a positive 6. So this is a circle, and it's got a center at negative 1, 9/2, and a radius of 6. And I wanted to make sure we went through one that was a little bit on the messier side and had fractions, because there are some like this in the homework in my math lab.